Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us for our webinar on financing for nonprofit projects. So I am Paul Daly, and I have got with me John Weber, who is also known as Worldwide Weber.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and excited to talk to you guys about how we can help bring projects to international needs.
And as well, we've got Nick Rogerson, who you'll be hearing a fair bit from today, and he's he's the guy that actually kind of makes this program work. So Nick's based out of DC. Hello, Nick.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so looks like people are still trickling in. I believe in starting these things on time, so we're gonna roll right into it. If you have any questions, you can either submit those in the little question dialogue, or if it's one where you'd like to ask it, vocally, you can go ahead and raise your hand. There's a little raise my hand thing, and I will try to keep a lookout for that. And let you, I'll unmute you and let you ask the question. Either way is fine, and we'll take the questions as they come. We actually don't have a whole lot of material to go through. I've kept this intentionally pretty short, with in mind that there will probably be a lot of questions. So without further ado, let's roll into it. So we call this the Empowering Program. That's just sort of our internal name for it. This is our answer to, gee, I need an Outback system for this worthy cause, wherever it is. So what we're going to talk about is, kind of what the program is, how it works, the process looks like, as well as, we'll give you a couple examples of some projects that have been funded recently and what made them successful, and then we'll go through, what it takes to get one of these off the ground. So let me give you a quick introduction. The objectives of this program: we really want to create self-sustaining, solar storage businesses in underserved communities and underserved regions, right? So what that means is, it's not just, we're not looking to just go and like give somebody a system. The old saying, give a man a fish he eats for a day and teach him to fish, that actually kind of applies here. And, you've seen case after case, if you've, been doing this stuff for very long, there's a lot of World Bank projects that were done a couple decades ago where they just gave people solar panels. They came back 5 years later and nothing worked because they never trained anyone. They never made it anyone's business to keep all that stuff going. And, while solar is ostensibly, zero maintenance, there's always something you've got to do, and someone has to know, how to fix it if it breaks. And so what we want to do with this program is, get everybody together that needs to be involved, make sure we're training people, on the ground who are going to be there, right? We're training local operators and installers, who we expect afterward to build a real business out of this, right? This is something where we're trying to enable, a livelihood and an economy and real local business that's run by the people there, and we want to make sure that they're hooked in, so that they can buy, not only our product but also all the other bits and bobs that they need to get access to business services. All that kind of stuff that we take for granted, I think, in in the U.S. and in other places like that. So another big aim, along those lines is, by the time the project team pulls out, there's got to be at least, some people there who can maintain the system and who are going to be responsible for it moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick here to talk about some of the mechanics of that.
Hi, thank you, Paul. So the way that I like to think about starting, I come from a development background, as many of you do, is I like to sort of start with identifying a problem. That can be humanitarian need or it can be development need. But we like to first focus on some very concrete issue that people are experiencing and then go about structuring a response to that problem. So the first steps would be identifying a potential project and gathering information, thinking about the need and defining it, defining the scope, looking at a recipient organization, a potential location, and thinking about whether there are installers, potential trainees, people who can carry this project through, develop it, usher it, and then, of course, as Paul mentioned, manage it in an ongoing way. So starting to think about those things as well as the size and scope is sort of the first step. The next step would be to get in touch with me personally, and we'll provide more details on exactly what should be in that initial contact and what would be the most helpful as a starting point. There's no solid hard fast rules, but there are ways that'll make the collaboration much easier for all parties. The third step would be that I would look for the right kind of funding agency, whether it's government, nonprofit, whether it's a foundation or some sort of blend, to and develop a strategy for pursuing this. We would work together to collaborate and prepare proposals and all of the relevant documentation, which is extensive in most cases, very extensive. And we would work together over a pretty elongated period of time to develop our proposals, and then basically we wait and cross our fingers. And then of course, once we have word, usually there's due diligence stages with specific review of not only the materials we initially provided, but follow-up materials, and an ongoing dialogue that opens between potential funders and all of the project team, the sort of consortium of partners, and that can take some time, but then that is moved into the actual project development phase.
Nick, if I may add one thing, if on the previous slide, if you have the humanitarian need and you have the location and the host recipient, but you're struggling finding a local installer to help with the system sizing and exactly what you do need, we have an extensive distribution and installer community around the world. So please don't, if you can't find a local installer who knows solar, we may be able to help you identify one. So please don't think that you can't go through with a project just because you've got the first two bullets, but you can't quite find the guy that can help you do the system sizing and everything else that's needed for the grant. We may be able to help you. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to make that connection with you. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, John. So there are a lot of things that potentially make good projects. So there's no one answer or one rule. But one of the basics is that it's a problem that can't be solved by private sector. I mean, that's one of the main things that any funder of projects like this would look at, is why won't this be addressed? In other words, why do my resources need to be devoted to this particular problem? Why are the markets not taking care of it? And of course, that describes a whole huge number of projects and problems. So the need, like I said earlier, the need can be humanitarian or developmental, but one of the primary factors is internal sustainability of the project and social impact. So examples of this can be pretty varied. They can involve education, natural resources like water or community energy. They can be productive end use cases like health services or storage, agriculture. We'll talk about examples from some of these categories and how they might fit into the big picture. But the thing that ties them all together, and the thing I'd like to underscore the most, is all of these projects should have a very strong social and developmental impact. So because it's important that we are, in any grant, there are almost always reporting requirements and monitoring or evaluation requirements, meaning we have to be able to show with usually quantifiable data the kinds of impacts we're having. So if we can point to those impacts really concretely.
Hey, Nick, we've got a question from Mark Dixon. Mark, I'm going to unmute you for a second. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Hi, Mark.
Okay, well, I guess he doesn't have a question anymore. Oh, Scar, let me try. Oh, he's self-muted. Okay, so, well, never mind. I guess we'll go back to it then.
Okay. So the impact can be in any sector as far as we're concerned, but just as long as it's there and that it's trackable and measurable and that we can concretely point to it. So they can involve economic or socioeconomic factors. They can involve basic resource management. They can involve environmental or conservation factors. They can involve end uses like agriculture. The scope, there's also no hard, fast rule on the scope, but what we want to do is we want to maximize our efforts. Since there's so much legwork that goes into applying for grants really at any level, our goal is to work to develop scalable solutions and maximize our efforts within each individual application or proposal so that we can get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. So it's much better to apply for a larger grant, rolling out a couple of sites, for example, than it is to apply for a very, very small grant, looking at just one tiny little site in isolated project or community. That's a preference in general on our end as well as funders' ends, because there's so much due diligence that goes into developing projects that it's a simple matter of trade-off in time and money. So the other thing that we're looking for, and it's really important both on our end in terms of collaborating and partners to work with, but definitely on the funders' end, is a credible project team. Every proposal I've ever seen has had a section on who's going to do this, who's going to implement this, and what are their qualifications to implement this. So technical experience is obviously really important. Credibility as an NGO or nonprofit, credibility delivering the kinds of social impact that we claim we're going to deliver. That's really, really important. And as John alluded to earlier, we're happy to talk about how to put together the right team if we're not exactly sure in that case.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of example projects that we've seen some recent successes with.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting project that we have gotten approved and funded. So Outback has worked with Remote Energy, which is a nonprofit firm that specializes in solar technical education, develops curriculum and coursework surrounding technical education. And this project is going to be located in Senegal, a little bit outside of Dakar, at the Dakar American University of Science and Technology, which is a technical university that is seeking to move more into vocational training as well, to expand its offerings on vocational work. So this project will involve developing a training center that will be permanently there, and the training center will be a part of the university's ongoing academic curriculum. We're working with a group called ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, and USAID funding. And it'll develop a pilot training course that'll last a couple of weeks and will actually be focused on 1 week on on a general solar technician training and 1 week on a women's only training. The cool thing about this model and the project that we're developing is we're working with all the partners to hand off the model. So after the initial pilot, local representatives, the local team for the university will work in collaboration with Outback and Remote Energy to develop an ongoing program, and they'll manage the training center, which will go on indefinitely. So we're really excited about it. Yeah, so we're really excited about it because there are all sorts of benefits and future opportunities involved, but there will be a program of ongoing support for graduates. There will be ongoing curriculum development and modernization. So we'll keep the curriculum, the partners, the consortium will keep the curriculum updated and in accordance with the norms and standards of Senegal. Part of it is developing those solar standards to further off-grid and remote energy use and development. But for Outback and for the partners, there's an opportunity to scale this project and develop it much further. The USAID and ANSI are both very interested in this kind of technical education, especially with a gender focus. And we're currently looking at going further beyond Senegal and how we can expand and where, and building new channels for this type of technical and vocational education, as well as for Outback products and impact.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out is for those of you that have been through our energy storage for solar professionals class or the previous certificate program, remote energy is who we typically use for that training. I mean, so these are top-notch trainers, that we rely on domestically, who are taking their expertise and building up, really high quality installers, in Senegal. And I think what makes this exciting for us is, we know these guys are gonna be good at it, and it's gonna build a reputation for, the industry and our product and solar just in general. So we have one more. Let's talk about
question
that.
on that previous. Now, Nick, one of the things that we are doing with that training materials is, because it is West Africa, this is developed in English and then translated into French, correct?
Yes, the materials will be translated into French, and the interesting thing is that the trainers who will take it on after remote energy, who will have the program handed off to them, are fully bilingual, so can work in both languages, and the university operates in both languages actually.
And that is an important point to make when thinking about if you want to create an education center somewhere in the world, is making sure that we can hand it off in a very nice way. So not only having a good installer group, but if we're looking at doing an education portion, making sure that we have the right resources to perpetuate that after our initial efforts.
Yeah, we've got a question came in, by the way, from Matakondan from Saudi Arabia, asking, I think, how to join one of these trainings.
For the ESSP program, or for just an international training?
I think just, some international Outback training, like how would someone in, say, Saudi Arabia, find a training to go and participate in, which is somewhat tangential to this conversation, but I think very relevant, in that we're trying to build an infrastructure where this kind of training is more accessible.
Yeah, for somebody, in my opinion, for somebody in Saudi Arabia, it'd probably be best to hop on an Emirates flight to join us here in Seattle, since it's a direct flight out of Dubai to Seattle, and then they can join us for the week training here in the United States. Outside of it, we have some partnerships, especially like with African Energy, who's helping us develop on the Dakar site, but we don't have a set schedule like we do with the ESSP program here in the United States.
Cool. So and it speaks to the need for, why we're so excited about these other training centers, because, ultimately, we don't want people to have to travel so far just to get quality training.
Mm-hmm.
So let's, change topics a little bit. Here's a project that's not so much to do with training, but I think is very interesting for some other applications as well.
So I think I'll take this one. So we are working on cold chain with dgrid, and I'll have Nick expand on sort of the genesis of this, but I'll just take a moment to talk about dgrid so that you have a point of relevance to understand why this is such a neat idea. So this is a flat pack. It basically just comes as walls built on onto a pallet that then gets constructed on site with really, really high quality product that allows customers to get refrigeration just about anywhere in the world. It doesn't have a large footprint. The standard size units are just essentially it's a 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot cube, and it can be expanded out to a larger idea. And as we know around the world, losing food and produce because of a lack of refrigeration is the #1 waste. We make more than enough food in the world, but making sure that that food is actually available is very important. So Nick, I'll hand over how we got into that opportunity with Rwanda, and I'll add something at the end.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, John. So what I'd love to highlight on this in particular is how, in this case, what we're trying to build is an initial pilot that we hope has a lot of scalability, and we're very excited about that scaling process. So this particular project in Rwanda will work with an agricultural cooperative, and it'll provide much needed storage. That cooperative has trouble storing fruits and vegetables, and then has trouble getting them to market. And so there will be the initial impact of that particular cooperative, but the cool thing about this grant is that it's a research grant. So it allows for some data collection, which is highly valuable in the field of development, as many of you or all of you know, because you get to turn that into more opportunities. So collecting this data, having the track record and the credibility of developing an initial pilot allows you to spin off and scale. So we've got a number of projects in the pipeline that are working with dgrid at larger scales, and the work that we do in Rwanda in particular in this summer pilot will fuel all of those.
Yes, we had a good question on this, came in from Balil Hassan. If it's off grid, how are we going to manage the operation of the refrigeration when it's cloudy? And I think that's where energy storage comes in. Nick or John, do you know if there is a generator associated with this site?
There is not.
There won't be a generator. Oh, sorry, John, you go.
So there's a couple different ways that they manage it. As Paul said, energy storage is part of this unit, as well as what we call thermal loading. So there's actually very large barrels of essentially water. It's a mixture that goes inside of the unit. So not only are we storing the refrigeration in the form of lead acid batteries to provide power, but the unit themselves also take that into account by having the possibility of actually adding essentially extra material inside the unit to hold the cold for a longer period of time. And we work with dgrid and their engineers to make sure that we understand, if you have long, cloudy or monsoon seasons, to make sure that all of that is possible. And of course, with Outback equipment, we can potentially bring in a generator. We try to avoid that because that creates some complications with bringing the right fuel in and things like that. Propane generator is usually better than a diesel or gas, but then propane can be difficult to get a hold of. So we have contingencies on how to manage that, and we would enjoy the challenge of hearing about what your needs are so that we can address those.
Cool. So you guys ready to move on and we talk about some of the other stuff that's in the pipeline?
Yes.
All right, so we do that. Yeah, so these are projects, and we'll expand a little bit, that haven't been awarded yet. They're ones that are somewhere in the process that we described. So, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so the reason why we wanted to sketch out some of these is, I won't go into detail on every one of these, but the ongoing thread that sort of ties them all together is that they're all high social impact projects in places with high need, and we've got concrete problems that are being responded to very, very concretely. So we're working with local NGOs to power clinics, providing 24/7 power for much needed services like concentrators for respiratory illness. We're working with schools. We're modernizing and doing diesel abatement programs. We're working with medical and as we said earlier, agricultural storage, and we're working it with the Solar Electric Light Fund and the Ray Pertz Foundation to provide lighting that prevents sexual violence, because there's a lot of research on this in Uganda. We're working on conservation projects to strengthen local responses and local groups' conservation ability, capacity, and sustainability plans. And all of these are sort of ongoing and in development, but they each represent the sort of varied types of projects that we could work on, but the unifying thread.
Okay, let's talk a little more about the process.
Okay, so we'll talk in 1 second about exactly concretely what the first step would be and what would be the most helpful information to reach out to me with. But this process, we want to set realistic expectations and sort of get a sense of a snapshot of the way this works. Funding organizations all have priorities. That's the first thing to note. So it's not like every funding source will fund just anything if the proposal is good. They all have concrete desires. They all want to be able to talk about their social or economic or environmental or developmental impact in a very particular way, because they have stakeholders and shareholders, and they want to be able to communicate that. So we have to be very clear and careful about how we target and which potential funders we reach out to with which projects. And we want to align any time it's possible. We want to align ourselves with the goals of the funder. And so sometimes that means going to A funder rather than B funder, or X funder rather than Y funder. But sometimes that also involves a shift in the structure of the project if it makes sense for all parties. So the other really, really important thing is that the recipients, the end users, which are sort of crucial to the project's success. All of everybody, every member of the consortium is incredibly important, and we're developing, when at its best, we're developing teams to collectively solve a problem. So we have to have engagement and communication and clarity from all parties, and the other really big thing to note is just to set a realistic expectation about the time frames. These can take a long time. I mean, it varies a lot, so it can range from a month or two to much longer. So, when we talked earlier about the process and how it works, and gathering information, defining the problem, reaching out to me, working together to jointly develop a a proposal and a budget and so forth. After we do all of that and submit, we may have to wait for quite some time. And the initial proposal might not get funded. We may have to go to a different funder, or we may have to clarify, revise, or change some aspect of what we're doing. So it can be long, and it can be, and it is definitely tough. But it's worth it if we develop the right kind of projects, and also if we prioritize our efforts right. So that's part of why we talked earlier about the size that we're looking for. Bigger size is generally better. I mean, moderate to large size is generally better, because just of the amount of effort it takes to go through the whole process, and the potential return on that effort generally tends to be larger. And because Outback has a lot of capacity technically, it's worth pursuing slightly larger opportunities, since Outback, being a part of the Alpha and Intersys family, is able to manage that and has that credibility in the funder's eyes. And
hey,
then,
Nick,
sorry.
We've got a question from Moral Gattaro. Can you fund a U.S.-based 501c3 for a project outside of the U.S., for example, Haiti?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely. In fact, the project, the training center that we're working on, that we've gotten awarded, is a remote energy, is a U.S. 501c3. So the short answer is absolutely. Depends on the project and the location. There are obviously geographical restrictions, but Haiti specifically would seem, on first glance, to be a great potential place to work.
Yeah, we've got another question. I got a few of them coming in, so let's do that for a moment. We got a question coming in from Clay Luna. It says, you had a low cost of $250,000. Is this a base, or are projects funded for smaller amounts than this?
No, projects can be funded for smaller amounts than that. I mean, it's not like a hard floor or anything like that. The only thing we wanted to sketch out is the sort of ideal size for projects, the kind of ideal range that we should be shooting for. But I mean, any of these collaborations would be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and smaller could work.
Yeah, I mean, just as an administrative point, I would have to say a project that's much smaller than that. I mean, if you're 249,000, it's not that big a deal. If you're talking about a $5,000 or $10,000 project, it's going to have a lot harder time getting attention, because we're going to be focused on some of these larger projects that have bigger impacts, because that's how we leverage Nick's time, as well as the support from within the organization for those kind of projects. So the range is really, it's almost more about us and this program. You don't have to be squarely within the range, but if you're way under, the risk is it's just not worth all the time and effort to put together the materials. And if you're way over, then it's just too hard to get funded.
I may have one thing to add to that. If you do have a what you think is a $15,000 or $20,000 site, and that's sort of, as Paul described, well under the sort of the threshold, because Nick, it takes almost just as much effort to do a $50,000 grant as it does to do a $500,000 grant, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why we want to shoot for larger projects. One way to do it, though, would be to think about combining a few different smaller projects into one larger project. As long as there was a unifying thread and it made a lot of sense, one can propose to do some particular kind of development project in 5 different sites and apply for that with one organization. That would probably be a better strategy than looking at a much smaller project.
And the solutions for those projects don't have to be cookie cutter. We don't have to say it's just going to be this and it all has to be the same. So if you have, I don't know, make something up, 10 villages, or you have one village, but you know of 9 others that could really use it as well, within the grant, we can custom design the solutions for all 10 of those villages for electrical needs or whatever you're looking to do, and combine that all into a grant. And that's a really great way to get it up into a number that makes it well worth the time and effort to put together that grant.
Yeah, we've got one more question from Matakondan again. Is the project host will get training? Is it if he hosts more than 3 or 4 projects, then the projects they'll get training for the same project size, 50 kilowatts. So he's talking about really, multiple projects within Saudi Arabia, I think, which is a good example of what we were just talking about. When you put multiple projects together, it becomes much more attractive, not only to us as the team trying to get it funded, but also in some cases to the funders, because now you have a real program. It's sizable enough to get the attention of people that are higher up in the local governments, so on and so forth. Any further comment on that, John? I think you do a little more in the Middle East than I've done. So.
Yeah, and if I understand his question correctly, if there's multiple sites, then part of what the grant can provide for is possibly even having people come over, like we talked about the ESSP program earlier. Part of that grant process, if we don't have local training, is to work into the grant, having the plane ticket, the hotel stay, and things like that for that local ownership to get trained here in the United States if possible. So that's just part of that conversation that Nick will have with you while you're creating that grant, to make sure that it has that survivability, and doesn't unfortunately fail after the first year because the people on site had minimal training and aren't quite sure how to manage any issues that may come up.
Yeah, and we got a similar comment from below, regarding Pakistan, that there's so many rural areas where there's need for schools and hospitals and so forth, and people just aren't doing this. So I think, John, you spent a fair bit of time in Pakistan recently. I mean, what kind of stuff is going on over there that you think could apply to this?
Yeah, we do have a local partnership, if you will, with a company that does do Outback-based trainings. They use our equipment during that training. But again, on a larger idea, if you have multiple sites, 30 or 40 villages, and you want to bring together the training, part of what that grant process can take into account is possibly using that same base material that we're talking about for Senegal or for Mozambique, and bringing it all together in Pakistan to create a training center in support of those, maybe just one full-blown training, but to support the idea of those 40 villages, let's say, that we want to electrify and bring clean water to, that kind of thing. So those are definite possibilities, and it really goes back to some of that earlier material we talked about, which is making sure that we have identified good, solid resources inside the country to make sure that it's going to go smoothly, not only during the install, but any troubleshooting or anything that has to occur after the fact.
Yeah, great. Let's keep moving. We'll get more specific into when you reach out to Nick, here's some of the stuff he's going to be looking for, and I'll let him expand on what each of those is.
Yeah, so this is both helpful for me to get a sense of whether I think the project is a great fit, as well as it's a great place for me to start compiling the materials and thinking about potential funding sources. So I'll just walk through the basics. The first one is just why the project is necessary. That's another way of saying what is the concrete problem, and why will it not get solved with the status quo? that's basically how every proposal will start. What's the problem and the background, and why is it not going to get solved without help? So then we really need to take a look at the basics in terms of budget. When we're putting this together, it's really important to be thorough because we want to have a full sense of the financial picture, everything that it's going to need for the project. We may or may not be able to get all of this, of course, and we will build our proposals based on what we can manage. But it's really good, I mean, just internally among in the collaboration, it's really, really important to have a full picture of the costs. So everything you can think of, including any training, any obviously the equipment, installation, the ongoing operations and maintenance, transportation and logistics, any ancillary aspects, like if, for example, if we're working on a school and that school needs some component to go along with the energy system, or let's say we're working on a clinic and the project is intended to be providing 24/7 power to be able to run oxygen concentrators for children who suffer from respiratory illness. Well, if there's no oxygen concentrator, then that probably needs to be included in the budget. So that's what I mean by ancillary equipment that isn't directly related to the solar project and that Outback may not be a provider of, but it still needs to be in the budget. So we're looking at a whole project budget, in other words. The other thing is once we've defined our problem, once we've figured that out, we want to set some expectations. We want to predict the outcomes. So we want, in this case, to be realistic, because once we say what outcomes we're predicting in a proposal, we're going to be held to actually meeting them. So we want to be realistic, but we want to be ambitious. It's that balance between the two. We want to have both a sense of some technical elements, like energy usage or consumption or access, or if it's in the case of health or agricultural storage, maybe some indicators related to that, like food wastage or medical wastage, medical supplies wastage, or some technical elements. But we also want to look at maybe socioeconomic elements or community level impacts. Maybe even agricultural projects. You might look at something like nutrition, or even infant mortality, or hospitalization, or body mass index, BMI, things like that. So we want to think of the kinds of ways, and this doesn't have to be a complete and exhaustive list at that point, but it's good to start thinking about what we're going to be trying to measure, how we're going to be trying to measure the kind of impact we want to have. And we got to know about the community. What is it like right now? What are the current conditions like? So this sort of gets to why is the project necessary? There's sort of similar related questions. But we want to know about the people who are going to be the beneficiaries. We want to know about the community. We want to know what the conditions are like. We want to know what current investment in efforts or projects or NGOs, what other people have done, things like that. And we really want to know, we want to have a realistic assessment of the timeline for the goals. Like, when do we want to do this, and how long do we think this is going to take, and why is that timeline chosen? So those are the sort of project basics, and then we want to know information about who the partners are. So if your company is the one that's going to do this work, what is your company like? How do you structure yourself legally? Like, for example, the U.S. case would be: are you a nonprofit? Are you a for-profit? Relevant information like that. Key team members, tax and/or legal designations, things like that. Those are all really, really important, because it gives us a big picture. We can start putting together the right team. And if we have the right team right initially, great. If not, and we need to find another partner that would complete the team, that would make the project a success, then we go about finding a partner. So that's a really good place to start. This is the information to reach out to me with initially.
Nick, what are some of the first, we've done some grants already and we've won some grants already and we've been told no thank you on a couple of grants, but what are some initial gotchas that people need to be aware of when they're putting this together, that if we have the information up front or are aware of something, that really makes it go a lot more smoothly?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest thing is just that the problem is a real problem that can't be solved in the status quo, because my experience is that every funder wants to know that their money is having this great impact. And if they are convinced after reading our proposal that whatever we're saying is going to happen would happen even without their funding, or that it can happen in some other way, then they're not going to be very likely to fund it. And the other big one is the team. I think ultimately, as with any investment, because this sort of funding, even though it's grants that aren't being repaid necessarily, it's investment in a way. And with any investment, I think people are investing in people. So having the right team put together, and the funder believing that the team can carry this out, and the team doesn't have to be just from one organization. It can be a consortium of different organizations. But having that right group that the funders are very confident can actually solve the problem and do what they're saying that they're going to do, that is absolutely crucial. And the other thing is details are just very, very important. So attention to the little things, that all of that the budget is crisp and makes sense and is coherent and it flows and it matches up with the proposal, with the written part of the proposal, and that all of that fits in the big picture and is credible. Those are the big important factors in our experience.
Okay, that's that's all the planned material we have. Let's, if there's, we'll give you a few minutes if there's any more questions. I think, and then we'll wrap up. So, any other questions? Like I said, you're welcome to submit those via text. If you want to hit the little raise your hand icon, then I will attempt to unmute you so you can ask directly. Looks like Matakondan would like to do that, so let me see if I can unmute you. All right, go ahead.
I'm so happy to be part with you people. Actually, I'm so glad I meet Nick in the webinar class. See, actually, Saudi Arabia is the upcoming market in on-grid and off-grid, like all the sectors. See, actually, private organizations, I was designing for private organization more than 2 to 3 years. I'm getting it's off-grid solution, like a container solution. For example, it's oil and gas companies. 90% I'm getting as a oil and gas companies. If I ask for some other competitor, they are telling they can't fulfill their needs. Because I have one project right now. I can discuss. Hope I think so. You have some time to discuss about that one. The customer is asking for 125 volt cathodic protection input with the charge from the charge controller. So in this case, how Outback will help us, and we have a lot of technical queries, because once we know better better output from Outback only, we can suggest Outback to our customer. And one more thing is, customer is not worried about the money. They are ready to pay. Okay, they are ready to pay, and they are asking for 5 days autonomy. That is some technical issue. But this case, how Outback will support us in technically. This is what I want.
So we have an international team that can help. That the question, especially when it gets into oil and gas and sort of helping themselves with cathodic protection, is really where I can help you make that connection on one of our international distributors or a local salesperson to help bring that training and that knowledge. So in the context of grant writing, this is probably outside of that question, but we can definitely help answer that question offline.
Sorry to again asking you the same question, because each time I can't go with the mailing team, and if you conduct like a webinar in online training, so this will help us more to get knowledge in Outback. See, not only one system they are requesting. Now they are requested 4 systems within this month. They are implementing around 150 sites, more than 60 kilowatt peak for 5 days autonomy. You can't imagine the system size as a container solution. So hope you could understand our need.
Yes, reach out to us after, and we can have that conversation where, of course, we understand that education is a very important part of what Outback needs to be successful with any project, be it with a grant or just a commercial sale. And we're happy to support on that education anywhere in the world, which is one of the things that I do when I travel to the many, many different countries that I do every year.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that came in on the text. So is there an application form? I think, the information we talked about, if you want to summarize that in a nice email to Nick, then he'll set up a call and get kind of the rest of the information from you, I think. We're not at the point where we've figured out a way to have a sort of intake form. That's probably something we'll work out, as we get more inquiries and start getting a sense of, what we actually would need. And that it tends to be a little more unique to each project at this point. So it kind of has to be a conversation. Let's see. So Jeff Sapor asked about water pumping. Have we done specific water pumping projects? I don't think we've done any water pumping in this program yet. Our equipment is certainly used pretty widely for that. It's one of the things that that Outback is known for is, we've got inverters that can actually start, pretty sizable water pumps, and that's fairly unique. So I've been involved in some of these kind of projects in the past before joining Outback, and there's lots of ways to do that. I mean, Water Missions is a good organization for those kinds of projects, and there's a couple other that don't focus on water, but do nice solar powered wells and water treatment and things like that. So a project like that, Nick, I think we would certainly be interested in taking a look at. It's right in the wheelhouse for the equipment, and I think for your activities, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it would be a great application.
We do have partnerships with various, we'll call them technology companies that are integrating solar with water pumping and already have that expertise. So again, this goes back to saying if you have the first 2 bullet points, but not the second 2 bullet points, we can still possibly help you. So if you definitely have the need, but you need the help on the expertise side, it's still worth reaching out to us because it's very likely that we have somebody that we can help you partner with, either in the United States or internationally, to help to bring that together. And with the example of water pumping, we absolutely do have experts that can help put together a package that will meet the water pumping needs, be it a couple gallons per minute or hundreds of gallons per minute with center pivot agriculture style water pumping. We have the experts that can help bring that together.
Yeah, we've got another question from Bilal about, is the Outback inverter capable of handling a lithium-ion cell? So there's not a straightforward answer to that question because there's a lot of variability in different lithium-ion battery configurations. That said, we've seen a lot of successful projects with Simplify, with Discover, with Blue Planet, and those kinds of batteries, which are essentially emulating a lead acid interface at a standard 48 volts. Most of those work fine. If you go on our website, there's application notes for how to deal with the more common ones. but there's no, with the off-grid product at least, you'll see the Radiant or the FXR, there is no CAN bus communication, which is what you would need if you're going to integrate with, say, like an LG Chem battery or one of the more sophisticated automotive type lithium-ion cells. We are working on doing that with our Skybox product, but it's intended for more grid tie applications, largely because the batteries aren't often warranted for off-grid use. Let's see. Another question from Clay mentioned organizations that can install systems around the world. So, what would be the possibility part of that? So that's so I would say reach out to John Clay. That he's Worldwide Weber. So John's responsible for our kind of global business development. So send him an email. I think it's jweber@outbackpower.com, isn't it, John?
Yeah, or at alpha.com.
Yeah, so either way, if you shoot him a note, then he can get you plugged into that network. All right, I don't see any other. Okay, I've got a hand raised from Asim Malik, so I will unmute you. All right, go ahead, Asim. Hello, Asim, do you have a question? Oh, Asim, or did you have a question? Okay, I guess not. So let's see. That's it. Oh wait, I got one more coming in. Oh, okay. Suggestion to do more technical design webinars. I think on that front, if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see all the ones that we've done in the past. And then of course, our on-site training is really the the gold standard for getting the hands-on kind of training if you're interested in the real installation stuff. All right, and another question just coming in from Clay: how many projects have been funded through the program? Roughly, it's not a straightforward question because we've only kind of formalized this recently. We've been doing it for what, about 6 months now, Nick?
Yes.
And we've got, I think, 2 that were funded, and then we've got several more that are, we're basically waiting on the final answer, or we're in some stage of due diligence. All right, so that looks like it. Thanks everybody for your time. It's been a really active, interactive webinar, so I appreciate that a lot. And this is obviously something that the 3 of us are pretty passionate about, and sounds like you guys are too. So this is how we save the world with solar and batteries. And with that, we will go ahead and sign off.
One last